Alright, thanks.
Well.
Got it.
Ready. How sick is the Harvard-Westlake team?
Pretty sick.
It's like everybody on the team is
That bad. And my boo.
oh shoot.
Nah, it's later. Alright. I might need it. Yes. Alright. Everyone good? This app is about intimate partner violence. Is everyone ready? I affirm Part 1 is framework, the role of the balance to resist the imposition of dominant ideology, marginalized groups, educational spaces, trephonis, or three powers, competition, interaction, marginalization, pay attention to power, is a step with educational equity, dominant relations, producing inequality, educational policies, listening people, equal threats, existing inequality, people enter the educational process of different experiences, trying to against screen, educating rather than overlooking forms of inequality, working at screen, makes explicit how power operates to marginalize individuals, attempting to abstract away from social realities is repugnant and eliminates the possibility of concrete social depression. Curry, 14, despite the pronounced faith-based one real consequence, discussing social realities of the conquest of one ideal theory of the other points on others, except for classroom action problems, such problems theoretically the happens, any real discussion of the concrete nature of person not such social problems are constantly emerging beyond the effects we observe are realizable within an ideological frame and standpoint. Epistemology is the best starting point for moral decisions. Other methods exclude some viewpoints to make true analysis of reality and possible mills. The arising takes place in an intellectual realm dominated by famous perspectives that reflect the experience of the privilege of concepts that spontaneously occurs as a result of hegemonic idealization. Power dominance concepts secure crucial realities, while concepts necessary for active mapping those realities will be absent. Realizations require validation of distinctive experiences as a result of perceptions no longer ignorant to realities. Ideals should be able to see them, yet they did not. Part 2 is inherency. Loopholes in federal law allow dating partners committing intimate partner violence to retain their guns, causing massive violence against women and queer survivors. EGS 14. Even though women in the U.S. are killed by dating partners by husbands, these loopholes can jail. July dating partners will possess guns. Each year, more than a million American women are assaulted by an intimate partner. The presence of a gun in the IPV situation increase the risk that women will die by 500%. IPV is also from in same-sex relationships. 1/3 of same-sex IPH are committed with guns. Thus, the plan. The United States federal government ought to ban the private ownership of handguns for intimate partner violence offenders in non-cohabitating dating relationships with Dono 15. Expand the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act to protect people in dating relationships by adding the word dating partners to the existing provisions of domestic violence. A small change would ban convicted users in dating relationships from owning guns. Part 3 is solvency. Access to handguns uniquely increases the risk of violence and homicide. Plans key to reduce it. Maloney 15. When again expressing the risk of homicide increased by 500% more than all the weapons combined. Guns if the choice is the majority of nations that department homicides women are 11 times more likely to be murdered with a gun than women in other high-income countries. Of 1,650 women murdered by men, the most commonly used weapons are handguns. Handgun bans empirically reduce IPV and do not cause a substitution effect. Mass 15. A handful of states and cities have moved to close the gap. Research shows that guns to random laws have been successful. Cities and states with the relinquishment laws have 25% fewer domestic gun homicides compared to cities and states without them. Would be close. Do not replace guns with other weapons. The impact firearms have on the level of use is staggering. The plan is empirically effective. It reduces homicides and background checks are successful. DS 15. Each state maintains their own individual laws, but all of us abide by the basic federal law. Most of the time, mandatory process in fact requiring officials to run their guns. The law has been proven to make a difference. The states where background checks are required, 38% fewer women have been shot to death by an intimate partner, according to the FBI. The laws prohibiting conviction need to expand nuclear violence convicted of stalking and dating abuse. Dating partners are responsible for the majority of intimate partner homicides. Facts about the role of guns escalate intimate partner violence are indisputable. Handguns are uniquely problematic for intimate partner violence. Long guns are not concealable and give survivors more time to escape. Dixon 93. One is the reliability statement this person uses what firearms. They are carried bragging and lying. Very common. Handguns are much more convenient. Still, an important factor in the host price factor, which is clear to handguns can apply. People can only be unaware the person is carrying a shotgun. These pulling out the gun makes such arguments more likely to spill over into murder by the time the assaulter has gone to another to retrieve their long gun and load the survivor crucial seconds to escape. And IPV prevents any sorts of larger social movement. Control over a person's identity fractures the potential for collective resistance. O'Doherty 15. IPV produces loss of agency and ability to control the world. Social participation may be restricted, leading to loss of opportunities to derive the benefits of group connections. IPV may lead to loss of identification with a collective or identification with abused. The specific lived experiences of survivors are more important than the vague, large-scale social claims. Denton 84. Violent episodes flow into one of the violence must be examined from within all the social process influence. Deeply violent meetings are filled with the lives of interacting individuals, each of whom is singular among the forces of a particular moment. IPV is perpetuated by a lack of education. Educational spaces must condemn IPV to start prevention. This has tangible impacts. Wolf and Jack 99. IPV is learned behavior that is word and swore by culture. IPV reflects inequality and reinforcement of various institutions. IPV has been ignored in major such problem as long as it's kept behavior by institutions. There's also a chance of preventing it. Preventive strategies which can introduce groups to values thinking processes efforts can be directed at school-age children. Adolescents offer unique windows of opportunity for primary prevention efforts. Specifically, they report increases knowledge about dating violence issues, positive changes, and active dating violence stuff for decrease in perpetration of dating violence. Guns atomize people by creating a politics of fear and individualism makes government oppression inevitable. Deborah Bander 15. The fragmentation of society into atomistic individuals awareness of right for oppression. What was to be offered in a country where citizens are not united? There's no individualism more extreme than the gun rights movement. Gun rights serves as a means for repulsing government or other citizens, not for creating a common civic culture. Sovereign individuals, even armed to teeth, no match for the brute power of tyrants. Gun rights movement underlines a collective, low kind of government oppression. Part 4 is framing. Social injustice is the root of mass-scale violence in prime society for external violence. Shepard, Hughes, 04, attention to the low violence and severity, attention to inequalities, misaligned ability to sensitize themselves, and misrecognizing privilege and style practice, and act as their own behavior, and hypervigilance every day, acts of violence, awareness, acts possible exploitations of social inclusion, normalize violence and social formations, violence encompasses control processes, all collective violence is part of a continuum. Evaluate probability first. 1% doctrine kills decision-making, sense any action has some risk. Avoiding risk freezes action, prevents change. The risks are constructed to preserve the status quo. It's the same strategy used to block every progressive reform like ending slavery and civil rights. And use probability first. Conjunctive fallacy proves Zukowski. A way to conjunctive fallacy applies to forecasting. Psychology seems to follow that adding additional detail make the story more plausible than government was guarding against plus scenarios of terrorism, the cost of resource. Someone judging what's fine with probability of any events will all go right. Will considering the likelihood that at least one failure will occur. Destructions are much more probable. We need to embrace this state as a heuristic. Our argument is not that the state is good at learning. The levers of power is key to confronting it. Zanati 14. Resistance to government is not linked to rejection. Constitutions now goes to the government questions over simplification of complex political rationale. This government is heuristic but careful differentiation from networks of humanizations. Things like engagement would not the way the revolution tended to twist power playing lever cards reveal not to apathy but to pessimistic activism. Within education, this is unique. The judge has an obligation to endorse political education to prevent ceding power to row 6. Depoliticization of life suggests a crisis of democracy. People develop a difference in civic engagement. Educators need to challenge the assumption that politics, gender politics, can be determined exclusively by government leaders. The debate about pressing social problems offers individuals hope and shape the conditions that prepare the last revitalize activism and citizen access to decision making. Educators need to be at the forefront of the defense of the most progressive gains of the state. Finally, use reasonability on T and theory for the app for the bright line of the existence of turnaround and carded solvency applicant having been disclosed for a month. 8 point, it prevents unjustified wins even with a live defense. You still lose without offense back to counter interpretation, which is the worst part of fairness, and you shouldn't lose throughout for being marginally abusive. Only if your abuse is enough for your opponents to lose. B point, it increases substantive debate debaters, but less incentivized to refill this theories and can be dealt with quickly by reasonability debaters. C point, my app has been disclosed for a month and it was the #1 app read at Emory. D point, they have debated this app numerous times. Proves T is disingenuous and an excuse to avoid engagement, especially when they get again. Actually that's fine. Cipher.
Yep. Ready?
Yep.
Your Curry evidence and your Trifonus evidence at the top talks about how we need to resist domination in terms of tangible conditions, and that things like abstractions are an attempt to like paper over the discussion. What counts as an abstraction?
So things that attempt to move away from material realities to either say that something is a prior question to understanding why certain forms of oppression are wrong, or that we need to have some sort of a totalizing or overarching theory to explain certain conditions.
This seems to apply to like ethical arguments. Does it apply to anything else?
It would probably apply to a lot of critical arguments in the same way that it would apply to similar ethical arguments.
Alright, sounds good. Your Massia evidence indicates that there's no substitution effect. This seems to be a pretty broad claim. Where's the analytical and empirical warrant for why this is true?
The empirical warrant is Massia. It's a study. Further analytical warrants are within Dixon.
Okay. Where does it say the analytical warrant? It just says a handful of states and cities.
I moved to close the gap. Cities and states with their gun laws had 25%
fewer
domestic gun homicides. Would-be killers do not replace guns with other weapons.
This is talking about gun surrender laws. Where is this in the context of the AF? Do you defend a buyback program or something?
No, it's not. But it's not gun surrender laws. It's forcing people to give up guns for intimate partner violence in states that have done the same policy as the AF.
Got it. Next question. Your DS evidence indicates that it says that the plan is effective because things like background checks are effective. Do you defend background checks?
Background checks
how do you solve for this?
Background checks exist in the scope. When people buy guns, they are run through background check. But the problem is if you come up and it says that you have committed intimate partner violence against a dating partner, you are not barred. Only if you commit intimate partner violence against someone you are married. The evidence warrants that those background check systems are effective at reducing intimate partner violence.
I guess my question is, so the loophole, who does the loophole exclude in the status quo?
People who are convicted of intimate partner violence against a dating partner are still allowed to buy guns. If you commit intimate partner violence against someone you are married to, you are not allowed to buy guns. The plan would ban people convicted of intimate partner violence against a dating partner from buying guns.
No, this is a federal loophole. That's what you contextualize, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The framing arguments.
The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act.
Got it.
Is the federal policy
Got it.
that
your Shepard-Hughes argument says that social injustice is the root cause of mass-scale violence.
Correct.
Is this a root cause? This is just a root cause claim, correct?
What do you mean?
This is just a root cause claim for other types of impacts, right? Can you extend this as an independent impact on 1AR?
It is not a reason to vote affirmative, but it's definitely a weighing argument that could apply based on NC arguments.
Okay, sure. Next question. Your 1% doctrine argument. What counts as a 1% risk?
Well, there's this phrase that you guys tend to use that's 1% risk of the dissad means you automatically vote neg on face because 1% fosters and value to life.
One more. I have a little time left. One question. The fallacy argument. What is the conjunctive fallacy?
It's when you combine multiple long link chains. The argument is both that you would have to multiply the probability of each individual chain together, or each individual argument, which means that long link chains can be rounded down to 0. And it also explains that we tend to overestimate the probability of very high magnitude impacts because society teaches us to believe that things like war and terrorism are huge impacts. Are we starting prep?
Yep. Four off case. On the case, start on the framing contention and the section CDF.
Framing is in top or bottom?
It will be bottom.
Okay.
Bottom, then the top.
Okay.
Have you emailed?
Yeah, I don't know.
You said 45?
345.
Yeah.
Sorry, framing, then framework, then contention proper.
Yeah.
You're sending.
Yeah.
Timer to 67 minutes. It'll be quite a long NC. Okay, I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay. Alright, is everyone ready? First off, is the NC, the standard is minimizing existential risk. The A point is that the greatest aggregate harm to health and well-being, which are both tangible impacts. As for the 1AC, the B point is emergency exceptions. Even if theories generally we ought to follow rule access opportunities, it is an exception to any moral theory, since it denies our ability to achieve anything. The C point is the ethical certain means to prevent existential risk to ensure the future has value regardless of the true moral theory. Bostrom 11 warns you to test the present action. Don't be confused if you are uncertain. Define preserving our ability to recognize value to the future according to ensuring a future meant best way to increase the probability that the future will contain value. Next off is the counterpoint. The counterpoint text is the 50 United States of Washington, D.C. ought to ban the private ownership of handgun for intimate partner, phone, offenders, and non-cohabitating dating relations with gun control policy to be passed through this year's passing federal policies inefficient and unenforceable. That's Class 8060. Such a forward proposal substitute for state controls override state legislative federalism implies that state should have about autonomy as possible. There's been limited federal law enforcement apparatus in the crime. Nothing at the federal level courts wants to waste the need for gun control different sharply from one state to another. It also proves that there's no federal regulatory structure that can enforce the affirmative because they cannot solve since federal cops cannot enforce the affirmative, which means that the counterpoint is always better than this question. Next off is topicality. Interpretation. The affirmative must advocate for the prohibition on the ability to privately own handguns. They may not specify a group of people to which the ban applies. Oxford Dictionary defines ban as legal prohibit, and Cohen's Dictionary defines private ownership as being used by a private individual rather than a body or state. The violations that the 1C Pan text specifies only those committed of intimate partner bonds in non-cohabitating dating relationships. Plans require blanket prohibition on private ownership. What matters is not the restriction on certain people, but on private ownership itself. McCavity 96 ownership applies to anything because they be used for hunting. What needs to be done to prevent all private ownership by banning the sale of all firearms and requiring that all firearm owners turn in their weapons. Gun bans apply to everyone. Scalia and AIDS DC ban handgun possession by making it a crime. By making it a crime. Net benefits one is limits the line selection of a certain group of people toward the top of their interpretation unless the plan specifies a group of people to have a handgun in the region of the United States. So with AC point is that is research but not research. Every upwards they frontline those on the fringe exposing research rate which creates infinite out-of-round abuse. The B subpoint is class only the after prepared making a one-side discussion which turns any depth or education clip that the one AC can make because that cannot meaningfully class or make the best answers. If there are too many affirmatives, this C subpoint is predictable. There are always better prepped case allowing them to cherry pick scientific generic points equal acts off because hyper-specific groups knowing disadvantage uniqueness. The D subpoint is topical to ensure and satisfies the act about picking point from the core of the literature. Most authors discuss blanket handgun bans on general. It does not matter if it was solving the advocate because it ultimately begs the question of whether or not that was a legitimate part of the topical literature. To begin with, the E subpoint is field context prohibition, and the topical is clearly distinct from controls. Limiting access to handguns for a section of the population is not a ban but restriction. Case 82. At the meeting of the American Society of Criminology panel was informed of distinguishing control from prohibition, which he characterized the extremes proposals. Not only is the prohibition legally very different from control as a matter of political reality, but prohibition advocacy, the impediments of the gun control laws are politically resisted because gun owners assume they're part of the complication program. This means that the has to be a counterplan. The one is he contextualizes the one is he contextualizes the act as an extension of background checks. If it is true that there should be an argument for the negative, because background checks exist in the status quo, and the court debate centers on whether blanket ban is desirable. The act often already benefits most cases, as well as the majority of the public argue for gun control. Adding exceptions lets themselves their advantage and escape the best negative offenses, which centers on particular groups who need gun for self-defense. This ways their offense. The ace point is that these will get advantage specific to their group, which counters which captures their trip often, but let the negative apply broader answers against the same specificity within the playing field. The B point is that specific state regions slash plans are enough to preserve an act rapid advantage, but are at least manageable since it's possible to prep most of the regions of the United States. Under view to the topicality argument, topical version of the act solves their offense. They get either A point ban guns are used, ban a type of handgun that is used a lot and domestic violence, or B point either defend a whole res affirmative and defend links to the entirety of the resolution. Now the vote of fairness debated as a competitive activity with wins and losses in the ballot. Says vote for the better debater, not the better cheater. Education school fund debated with educated value. Job debater won the round. Been a rap with you for me since I've had to alter my time strategy to check peace with the one strategic flexibility. Second project argument is no punishment. It lets them sever and restart the one word between 7 to my time and culture permanently alter my strategy. Use competing interpretation more reasonable, arbitrary, even with the violence, because there are principal reasons why the Brent one determines what is reasonable, which takes out your number one argument. The second argument is that reasonable force racism on is increasingly racism with reasonable is comparative, and the ones that get away with defense not their meaning to minimize intervention, since it promotes better rules with an offensive defense paradigm. No RBI is one. Point is that it's illogical. Obviously, you should vote for someone since they are fair, but that isn't false since there's no proper reasonability down. Second is that it chills their obvious discourage debates from checking abusive practices since abusive basis for prep while their abusive practice debate theory. Next off is the disadvantage. Congressional vote on Puerto Rican access to bankruptcy protection is coming. Now Obama pushes key to pass and saves the economy. Clinton 114 Jack Bush sent a letter to Ryan pressing for congressional action. Congress must act by March to give Puerto Rico bankruptcy protection to allow the territory to restructure its massive debt pool. Policy told colleagues that Ryan committed to move legislation early in the new year. Ryan only committed to allow legislation to be addressed through normal legislative committee process. Obama will ratchet up the pressure. Ryan and Republican Congress will to act sooner than the committee deliberations would allow. With 3,000 Puerto Ricans living in the island every week, primarily be elected vote bricks forward. The issue is likely to take more urgency. The territory is already a technical default and plan kills political capital and array lobbying polarization, make it political suicide. That is the economist in 15D. The gun laws are not about to change. One must recognize the disproportionate power of the gun lobby. The NRA rallies supporters with the fear and distrust of the government and intimidate the Republican politicians by turning support for gun rights into a test of conservative. The group diverts attention away from the guns. The sort of gun control has seen dramatic results in other countries. It's not about to happen in America. Americans becoming increasingly polarized. An element of new tribalism to the policy. Americans are becoming more hostile to gun control, and more guns are more necessary for self-defense. Numbers conceal widening gaps, and the impact and it costs global economic decline cascade. And 14, Puerto Rico's finances affect $3.7 trillion municipal, almost monarchic, because 70% of the United States mutual funds that focus on state debt hold the securities which are tax exempt. The bonds returning traded yield 8.27. Bonds have traded at a junk on concerns that the shrinking economy will make it hard for the territory to repay the debt, and the impact is global war. Krugman 14 war does not pay even an interprudent war. World war would necessarily inflict a severe economic harm on the victor. One war is very expensive, yet wars keep happening. Governments gain politically from the war. If the war makes no sense for Ukraine, they wind the Russian economy with the growth has been sputtering, and Putin needs a distraction. Similar arguments have been made about Falkland in 1982. Nation of ultimate rally around the which is how foolish the war, or how awful the weight of the war and terror took Bush's approval to dizzying heights and Putin raiding sword since Ukraine. And this turns the case because economic recession disproportionately impacts minorities. Keywords reach black employment will still trace Plus, the unemployment level for whites out of recession is that black poverty is again on the rise. African Americans tend to be the first to lose their job when a downturn hits the job. Losses have been deep in manufacturing, construction, and disgrace tends proportionally held by African Americans. Racism compounds an already bad situation. Now, the framing an argument, the 1% doctrine does not apply to our affirmative. This is in the context of us trying to paper over and justify the status quo. Obviously, it's not our argument. We use the disadvantage to justify voting negative on the counterpoint, which means it does not apply. Also, risk analysis solves better. Ignore multiply magnitude and probability and create both things into our impact calculus, which is better than one or the other. Second, that rest of the statement would still say that a small risk extinction, but they're trying to use an intuition just by intuition. Just by intuition, they will extend the role of but one subpoint is that extinction outweighs their offense. A subpoint is reversibility. Humans cannot be brought back after extinction, but structural bonds can be reversed, which is natural to value life plans. The B subpoint is the future generation. Structural bonds only hurt the current generation, but my extinction impact ends all potential generations in the future. C subpoint is time frame. My evidence indicates that the risk will over soon, so it should be prioritized since their impacts can be solved in the future. The D subpoint is that policymakers should prioritize extinction because they are responsible for all of society, but high magnitude impact will affect more constituents. Now, on their reasonability arguments, one might story proves that they're severely flawed and is a reason to vote against them. It's not an explanation of why they are fair. Second is that it causes the abuse of the bonds they encourage showing the line. Third is that only competing interest prevents future abuse of practices. That was the norming argument on the cheat shell. Their interpretation, their broad one is not reasonable. Solvency advocates are not sufficient to adjust by voting any point in the literature. Also, all of our T arguments prove that they are not a part of the topic literature, which means that it begs the question of why they're reasonable.
You have hit this AF like 4 times. We've
Yep.
hit PV like 10 times total.
That is
You
true.
clearly have substantive strategies against this AF. Why did you choose to read T?
Why did I choose to read T? I did not read. I could not read case turns against this affirmative.
Why?
For example,
You've read a
in
lot
the
of
past
case turns
against you,
before.
in the
We've beaten this AF on case turns.
Yeah, believe me,
The characters exist.
that's the point. It proves the abuse on T. Our argument is that by specifying to a specific group of people, it has a couple impacts. The first is that it non-unique, for example, dissent such as the politics dissent. You have this Jensen evidence that you title as game over that says that the plan is so small that it's not a political impact. Second is that when
So
I
the
debated
fact
you
that
in
we
the round
cut
robin-
good evidence and you guys just
I'm
didn't
gonna
cut
continue
good politics
I'm
links
gonna
means our
answer your
AF is
question.
unfair?
I'm gonna
No, okay, I want to go
Okay.
back to the T standards.
Sure.
So, your Oxford Dictionary card, you cut it off and it says illegally prohibit, but then the next sentence says he was banned from driving for a year, which implies it can apply to one person. How is this a definition?
This is a definition because it is a question of what the ban is on. In the context of
It
the
says
example
it
that
can
you-
apply to
no,
one
believe me,
person.
I understand, but it's not the terms of the resolution. Let me explain.
Okay,
So,
no,
in the
it's
context of
actually
this
alright.
definition,
So
it's
then
a ban on an
your
individual.
McCavidians-
Our argument is that it needs to be a ban on the private ownership of handguns. The
Okay.
ban is not on a person; it is on the handgun.
Okay. Your McCavity card says a ban one way of banning was by banning everyone. This doesn't imply that a ban has to apply to everyone. Why is this a definition?
The McCavity evidence.
Yeah. It says what must be done is to ban private ownership by banning all the sales of firearms, not that a ban would mean banning all the sales of firearms.
It's talking about a ban in the context of banning private ownership.
Your
not
Scalia
banning
evidence also is
firearms.
one sentence that says DC banned handguns by making it a crime. That doesn't even say they banned it for everyone. How is this a definition at all?
It says that they banned the possession of handguns, which is exactly our argument. It talks about how within this municipality, right, they banned the private
Okay.
ownership of handguns,
Cool.
which is distinct from banning people from owning handguns.
Okay. Your link evidence, where does it talk about the AF, or what is the warrant for why the AF is unpopular?
Sure, the economist evidence indicates that the plan kills political capital because gun laws are heavily, gun control laws are heavily opposed by institutions like the NRA, which are able to control things like politics.
What is the status of the
The
counterpoint?
status of the counterplan is conditional.
Okay. Do you have a solvency advocate?
The solvency advocate for the state's counterplan.
Yeah.
What's a solvency advocate?
Someone who says you should do the counterpoint.
I don't have someone that says that the 50 United States and Washington, D.C. ought to ban the private ownership of handguns for answer the rest
Okay.
of the plan.
Do you even have solvency for the counterpoint?
Yes, the CLEC
The
evidence.
CLEC evidence says states should have autonomy. It doesn't say states passing a ban would be effective. Where does this prove to
It
work?
indicates that in the status quo, states have control over things. In the status quo, states are able to regulate things like gun control. The argument
That
the AF
obviously
is
is not a
one
ban.
means that the AF is able to solve because the conditions within each state are different, which means that state implementation is best. There's also characterized as a solvency deficit to the affirmative,
Okay.
which is the analytic.
You did not read any of the turns or anything, correct?
No.
Cool. Starting. You're up.
You're just sitting there and ignoring me, and I'm starving. You're welcome. No matter.
1:45. Guess we'll wait, but I will email it in the meantime.
I had like 3:46, right?
3:45.
Thanks.
So did you Scott's prep or no?
Yeah,
he's
I'm
not-
emailing
he's
it.
emailing.
Okay.
Alright, order, new off, T, K, or I'll give Bob a sec so we can do that.
Well, I figured it was for me. Good job.
Alright, T.
Alright, new off, T, case, counterplan, politics.
New off T counterpoint politics.
Case counterplan.
Okay, what was the order of case?
What? The top, then quickly solvency, the framing, and then the framing stuff. So top down.
Okay.
Ready? Interp, the neg may not read a conditional advocacy that passes the aff with a different actor. The violation is he defends 50 states conduct. The serious clash conduct is okay with every relation. Most responses go for the other one. So jump ship. Every time I respond to arguments, they have to defend their advocacy conduct. Force they have to put orders responses to everything. Whether having a discussion, any large encourages coverage over engagement, specifically new in the context of a pick out of the affirmative, because I can turn all new offense to the 1AR because I can't leverage the aff against the counterpoint, but they can kick out of it, which destroys 1AR strategy because I can't leverage the aff, and they kick out of whenever I put responses on the 1AR, which is key to fairness. Lecturing of strategy also key to advocacy skills by ensuring we defend our advocacies against objections instead of kicking out whatever has no response. Can I have your timer? Now T. First, reading T is a link. Wolfgang answers IPV for especially about lack of education and acknowledging that academia. They controls jump in. We can never talk about IPV, which is the same excuse to never talk about IPV. Every red table of friends fires speaking at reaffirms their views. It's a voting issue and a reason to prefer the counter interp, which is the active bit handcuffs talking about IPV being false offenders and the qualified solvency advocate in the late U.S. Scholarly Service 13. The Lautenberg Amendment amends the federal constitutional act by banning possession of firearms act and you'll convict Mr. Domestic violence, intended to stimulate firearms bans, and you'll convict of domestic violence. Proves the act uses the terms of art in the resolution. The continuation of Oxford American Dictionary also proves he was banned from driving for a year, which proves that I am topical. Standard is clash different advantage of different people drastically different colleges. Abusers take on foundations of respect, execute framing impacts, and force the negative burden of rejoinder. They have to respond to the specifics of the plan steps framing the 3 non-related disads, or the same generics in the world in which the aft defense whole res, and they never have to actually answer or engage with IPV debate specifics. All the key coming up with real solutions, or also too vague in general to solve anything because no one advocates national ban except Dixon 25 years ago. Key to advocacy skills by ensuring that we defend our positions against objections, which the ultimate purpose of debating in that way because it's about long-term skills to make us unique to self-select comparisons, coaching inequities, and monetary resources, and sex in the debate. Maybe the narrative to begin with now. Their offense. The McCavity and Scalia evidence are an example of a ban. They don't prove that a bans apply to everyone. Also, their limits arguments. First off, in the whole res, they every single dissent. And they can pick out of any group of people in a world looks like different whole res, which proves it doesn't solve their offense. It's also non-unique to their offense, and is worse since it negates reactions and they tell their arguments. But I've already read the AOC when they read picks, and also because plans require solvency advocate and disads don't. So if they can be disads to any group that's comparatively worse. Second, USFG spec and solvency advocate solves massive edge policy proposals in Congress. It's widely discussed and they have tons of responses. Third, that was a probability. Clear to people want to engage with their interpretation probability that people want to prep against plans. Fourth, it's been disclosed for a month, and the premier debate says it's the number one app on the topic. They are being lazy. They are not hard to agree. Hard to answer this app. Now, case. They have conceded the Trophonis evidence that the role of the judges reject oppression, which is a pre-fiat and prior question reason to affirm the AF impacts, which means you vote AF on the impacts that are back to IPV. Wolf is also a concession that is also conceded that IPV is uniquely marginalized in educational spaces, which means the impacts to solving IPV are a prior question and are the most significant impacts. Even if he wins that, the dissent causes structural violence, which does not cause IPV, so there's no unique impact. The framing arguments. Now, these arguments do not justify why we should always look to any impact. Everything has a high possibility of linking to extinction. For example, structural violence can escalate to extinction, which proves that if I win defense to the dissad, you would vote affirmative. Counterplan. First, permutation do both. Felon station and voice command solves better. Harwood. O2 balance make better justice. Federal governments working together. Federal regulations first. The minimum abilities apply uniformly. All districts with guns for criminalized. Second, this is a federal loophole. Having state responsibility less the federal government to avoid responsibility. It creates proofs. It also proves federal policies work, and there's no rollback because we're expanding existing policy. Third, federal legislation is to find national policy that avoids ambiguities that best affects Kim 15. The scope of program is limited. Most specific regulations are no substitute for federal action. The absence of federal regulations pay the spot pack from state laws, making easier trackers to move weapons from places with lax regulations of those on 4. Counterplan links to politics, safe housing, policy to appeals about the NRA, and increased lobbying, which is the internal link to GOP. The also will be a soft conservative state backlash now. Politics. First, multiple fights to stump the bill are top priorities. Leader bin. 2. Priorities of fiscal crisis after seal, the opioid addiction, trans, PCPP, party trade deal, these are things that Republicans say are priorities. Republican leadership list a number of topics we go through sanction energy, legislative one way person to war, third station Republicans above discreet RP. Second plan is popular and unifying. Turn Jensen 15, 80% Americans support. There's 1% contested Republicans by 16, 23 to 8% of government think it's a good idea. Missionary divisive politics, probing people to make stock projections, getting partner, because every second this would be a unifying popular elected class. Third, it's non-intrinsic. Logical policy we do both recognize the bad effects of not passing. The design 4 winners win. Forcing cultural less capable of agenda. Dickerson 13. The president can only let legacy choice. The GOP fight Republicans deal with. That's the old Republicans just and opposing him. They cannot be entering based moving through. Fights controversy, force Republicans cause a rift now. Lastly, gun decline doesn't cause war. Jervis 11. Hard to believe countries could be better to lead the community to fight each other. Even if free trade becomes discredited, hard to see how leaders mass would believe that countries could prosper by attacking others. Very fact we've seen economic downturn with that. Force shows that even if the economic club would not make war thinkable.
Alright. You read everything here, yeah?
Yep.
Cool.
Wait, sorry. On states, yeah. On states, not the 5 and the 6.
You
What?
didn't have to read the pro-Rese argument, right?
The what?
The pro-Rese, like 96 argument?
Yeah, that card on T, and then the 5 and the 6 on states.
Alright, I'm just gonna delete that.
Yep.
Five and 6 analysts, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. You're 45 now. computer just crashed, so I need my computer.
Word again?
What?
Word again?
Yeah. I
Okay, but
deleted my 2 in our talk. Okay, crashed again.
Oh no. Are you overwriting the old doc, or are you like sending a new one?
I'm not reading any cards.
Oh, okay.
My word is just like freaking out right now.
If there's analytics, though, I'd appreciate if you flash
Okay.
flash comment.
Alright. I like had this speech up ready. Is it okay if I just compile everything that I originally had?
No.
Because my computer would crash. No? Okay.
What? No,
Yes,
it's fine.
yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Sorry, my computer just like freaked out.
It's okay, Chris.
This happened last time I
It
did
still
a
likes you.
This happened last time I did a YouTube, Cameron.
Really?
Yeah. At the
New word.
beta
Have
lab.
you updated word even?
I have not.
No, the new word's worse. Like verbatim.
Or
I want to pass you a note.
I'll write it on my piece of paper too.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And then on the floor. You just go on Facebook and you can Facebook me. Yeah, I know, that's not what I want to do either.
This is taking so long.
So much scared. And stupid.
Really stupid. Whatever.
Alright, I just have one more thing to put on, and then that's all I had.
Sure.
How you're gonna do this? That's usually what you do.
yeah, sure.
Okay.
That's troubling. But maybe not that troubling.
So I'm not prepared him at all, so
Well,
it wouldn't be fair.
Okay. Set.
Okay.
Alright. Order is good, beef. Counterplan. Counterplan, disad, and then chief.
Counterplan.
Sorry, counterplan, the new theory argument, the disad, chief.
Counterplan. Theory. Disad. T. Alright.
Okay. Okay. Is everybody ready?
hang on just a sec.
Okay.
Okay, down it goes.
Okay. Counterpoint not going for conditional concede the permutation, adjust the test of competition. All answer theory or the theory here, the argument here, the counter-interpretation is that the negative may be a conditional policy action by the United States and Washington D.C. The counterpoint is predictable. My evidence for the station normal means for gun control the clock evidence indicates that normal means for gun control are via the station, which means that is entirely predictable, which takes out your class standard. Yes, it's an alternative actor, but you have not proven why the state specifically or something that you cannot engage with. The fact that it's normal means that the one you see already specified federal government, which means you should already be prepped out for this debate. Also, it solves any potential ground loss argument because the one you see should be equipped to prove that federal action is best, since otherwise they would not prove the action better than the status quo. Since the status quo uses things like states, if they weren't ready for states counterpoint, they would have lost anyways. Now, the net benefit check any of their arguments is how they couldn't predict the counterpoint, which destroys class, because I can't read a counterpoint unless I have a disadvantage to the affirmative, which I could not have read anyone's which I could have read anyone's counterpoint. Just counterpoint is our defense, which means that those arguments do not apply. Also, permutations check. You can win a permutation on any unpredictable counterpoint, which is terminal defense to the entirety of your show. And also the literature checks, because I've been solving the advocate, which proves that unpredictable. The affirmative could defend any actor they wanted. They should just to be responsible for the one that they selected. Our counterpoint is key to checking the affirmative, because the affirmative prep time a massive prep due to their favorites. The applicants like a pulse on the huge topic and frontline holdings of access to hundreds of cases. The impact is that process counterpoints are key generic against hyper-specific affirmative, even if they're in this instance. They're affirmative, they're predictable enough. I cannot prep quality generic stuff just with my time to also prep specific plans. Also, defending it conditionally is key to strategic reciprocity. The one point is that the applicants first, which are functionally conditional advocacy, since I have to prove that they're less desirable than my advocacy. One might multiple terms they get unlimited strategic flexibility, test accountable for themselves, or equals the condoms key to testing in the same way. Key to reciprocity. Second is that the applicants pick the best plan, whereas the negative force to respond. They should be able to defend their applicants multiple strategies, which they have a strategic advantage. Third is that the negative needs to pick multiple strategies against the have to test plan from multiple angles. The one to see their interpretation force the negative commit to a strategy for the one to see where the after decided on a perfect strategy due to infinite prep time, which is a good flexible negative strategy. Now, at worst, drop the argument. Interest counterpoints are defensive and don't implicate the bell, which means that voting me down on this question is inherently unreciprocal, since it allows for him to win on the counterpoint for me, but I cannot. Now, the disadvantage not going for, you can see that there's no impact to economic decline. There's no offense here. Now, I'm going for topicality. Definition for as an overview. Definition for topicality must be applied to the specific wording of the resolution. Our interpretation is that top left bans the ability of handguns to be privately owned. The wording of the res does not say that something ought to be banned. Rather, it says that there should be a ban on the ability of a handgun to be privately owned. This takes out your number one argument, is how our definition could apply to ban. Yes, that definition of ban is in the context of banning a person from owning a car, but it's not the same as banning the ability of a handgun to be privately owned, which is distinct. There are a couple of impacts that were dropped in the last week. The first is limits. There are 300 million people in the United States, which means that there are an exponential number of affirmatives. Their interpretation would mean restrictions on the purchase of guns by people on the terror watch list, for example, which would have some advocates that is being advocated in Congress. 5 dropped impacts. The first is research. To increase infinite out of abuse inside to research every affirmative where he can pick possible negative strategies, which lands the debate for the affirmative. The second is that it kills class. The discussion comes to one side, since knowing the advocates prepared, especially when their advocates so small that nothing moves aside. The takes out the politics dissent, for example, which is coordinated grounds of gun control, such a controversial issue. The third point is predictable. The advocates better prep on cases they are largely cherry picked groups of people. Some the advocate does not check because as potential groups of people meant that there are tons of possible advocacies. The fourth point is topic which the advocates incentivized to pick plans farthest from the course of literature. Groups that obviously affirm they can pick groups of people such as on the terror list, which kills equal access to office by making it impossible to negate. Fifth is field context. The case evidence indicates that means there were certain people is a form of gun control rather than gun prohibition, which is distinct. Field context controls the internally to any pre-round preparation argument, since it's the only reason we have going into the round. Also takes out your solvency advocate argument. Even though there's a solvency advocate, still begs the question of whether or not it's in the context of the rest of the field, which our interpretation would against the second dissent was ground. There are two distinct purposes of gun control. The too many guns approach, which seeks to reduce gun ownership via the race via the banning of the ability of the gun to be owned, and to keep guns away from dangerous people approach, which uses background checks to keep guns out of the hands of people who will use them dangerously. This should be a counter. The advocates consider the app should be a counterplan for the negative, because if it's better to target one specific group than the whole population, then that should be a negative argument. They also denied this key ground about self-defense, self-defense terms, because they're all in the context of women owning guns in the first place, but the app does not speak to that. Finally, they've conceded that topical version of the affirmative solves all of their offense, because they can beat a whole result with an IPV advantage, which still condemns IPV as something bad, which answers back your D-roll argument, your critique of T argument. Now, the framing issue on this Wolf 99 extension is that the KFT argument assume a different model of debate, with there are no procedural rules as long as the applicants lead the discussion, but one is that based adversarial. Even when talking about IPV, as good as it is not within the context of topical limits, and the discussion is useless because I will not be able to engage. Second is that their model kills debate and incentivizes finding obscure, non-controversial issues, and instead of voicing debate is new research and challenging their beliefs on the important issues like gun control. Now, their counter-interpretation does not solve any of our offense. The solvency advocate begs the question, because whether the solvency advocate is in the literature depends on what counts as topical or not, which is not the question, which is not the ultimate question of things like topicality. Now, their advocacy of the skills argument is just an education word in disguise. Their arguments assume that every life endeavor will require advocacy skills, but education is one more immediately valuable, since we have to be students, not advocates for foreseeable future. B is that much more broadly relevant, since advocacy skills are not only important when engaging radical politics. Education helps us in every area of life, such as research and career choices. Where another class arguments assume that IPV will be in every round of the topic, but HW is the only team reading this version of IPV. The impact to him and Nick and all the other Harvard-Westlake kids not being able to read this version of at the TOC is marginal. Now, as an overview to their interpretation, they cannot say justice affirmative is topical. All their standards about why allowing people to specify any group with solving avenues because they are arbitrarily limit their interpretation in order to get out of our office, but the standards will still allow them to specify a group. Now, the second disclosure of the solvency advocates do not check. There are hundreds of potential assets that could have predicted and research, which means that does not apply. Here's a case of the solves all the possible affirmatives that have a solvency advocate. The terror watch list affirmative, the mental health patients affirmative, which also means that you cannot solve any of our offense. Now the next, the only piece of offense they can have going for them is the question, but one is a topical version of the assault. They can ban handguns for everyone, including domestic abuse. Things that aren't with them about regional governments and types of guns, which allows them different areas of literature and solves their own liberty standard, which means that you can defend yourself against pigs. Third is that they say that they could distract away from this discussion, but they have no warrant for why discussing IPV in conjunction with other issues is bad. Fourth, they actually force a debate about generics because we have to reach states and states and a politics system to stand access to key ground. No one thinks that abusers should have guns. The question is just whether or not it's blanket prohibition or some other form.
Okay. I had, where is my time? There.
You had like, I think like a minute 45.
Okay. So the terminal impact you went for is what?
I went for the quash net benefit and the ground net benefit.
What is the terminal impact? Fairness or education?
I didn't weigh between the two.
You said education outweighs advocacy skills, but then you didn't weigh between education and fairness. But you conceded the 1AR's arguments about education, right?
What do you mean by one of the arguments about education? I made an argument as to how advocacy skills is not as important as other modes like education, but I did not speak to whether or not education or fairness outweighed. The 1AR did not either.
Your only links to advocacy skills and education are based on the limits offense, correct?
No, the ground offense would also probably
Sure.
why this discussion couldn't occur.
Okay. Order is case quickly and then theory, obviously. Case
Wait,
show.
your theory show or
No.
T?
No, T.
Oh.
It's not really T, but yeah.
Sorry, what did you say the order was?
Case quickly, then T.
Got it.
Honestly, you don't really have to go to case.
Conceded the app solves. It's just a question of whether or not I'm topical T. The biggest problem with the last speech was that he read for 4 minutes through ink but didn't respond to the responses to the limits offense, which were turns and outweigh his offense. He has conceded that the world in which the app has to defend the entire resolution or has to defend all groups of people, even if they can narrow down to a specific region, allows the negative to read picks out of any group of people because they can say that you should do all of the affirmative except don't ban survivors of intimate partner violence or don't ban people who have a terror watch list or any other group of people. They can also read disads to any of those group of people, which non-uniques all of their offense because it means that either way, one debater has to prep for every specific group of people. So there is no unique offense for the negative for a question of not engaging with the affirmative because in their world, the app would not know what the negative would pick out of and they would have to prep for every single argument. So they have literally no unique offense, but they have conceded 2 weighing arguments that were explicitly in the 1AR, which are more significant than their offense in terms of limits and ground. The A point was that the 1NC is reactive, which means that even if they only have the ability to respond to the app and I have multiple groups, they can make generics apply because they can prep their strategy. But if the app was whole res and the neg picked out a group of people, the 1AR cannot restart the round over again because they are skewed and because they are not reactive to the 1NC. The B point was that they can read disads to any group of people, which is comparatively worse because plans require a solvency advocate. So even if there are maybe 5 of them on this topic, they are definitely predictable. But if they can read disads to any group of people, there's literally unlimited amounts that they can do. So the app could not have good ground to engage with this, and there's unlimits in what they can do. Their terminal impacts are only based on limits and ground, and they have not outweighed their lack of offense with the affirmatives, which proves I solve all their offense. Now let's go through the arguments that you might think are sufficient to vote neg. The first argument, is that a topical version of the AF solves, because I can read my AF as a counterplan, which obviously doesn't solve any of my offense, because it would not allow me to not solve any of the picks offense, which would still allow them to do it even if I read it as a counterplan. In fact, the counterplan would be the pick. The second argument is that I have a topical version of the AF, which doesn't solve anything, because they could still read a pick, and if I in a world in which I talked about IPV, because they would just say that we should do this AF as a pick, and then they would go up the entirety of the offense. They say that the definition is the resolution has to resist the ability of handguns, but they have not extended their definitions as to why the AF is not topical. This is also not a T debate, because none of their definitions define the word ban. It says that a ban sometimes applies to all people, but all of my U.S. Attorney's Office and OAD proves that a ban can apply to specific group of people in the context of private ownership, so it's just a question of pragmatics, not a question of winning individual offense. He has a lot of floating offense, but none of it is weighed, and only the 1AR offense is weighed, which means the terminal link back to education and fairness is the most significant impact and the only thing that was weighed and the only thing that you can evaluate. He has gone for arguments about why I can defend a regular government or I can defend small groups of people, defending small governments or defending any government, which would not unique as offense would be unlimited and does not solve any of the picks offense. This is one argument. It is sufficient and it outweighs all of his offense. That's all you have to vote on. Figure out.
thing we have to deal with. Okay.
decision. Congratulations to making it to the quarterfinals of the Berkeley Invitational 2016. It is a 2-1 for the negative from Peninsula.
So I sat, and I think that the thing to talk about is that, you know, you're both doing a really good job here, and ultimately the issue is we've got a lot of stuff going on topicality, on the standards, and on the entire debate itself coming down to a single issue. Okay, we all appreciate that. There's a certain amount of this that there's a lack of clash, having to do with talking past each other and not really addressing each other's arguments. And that ultimately, I'm looking at this from the standpoint of going back to the negative standards that were set up as I understood them, which was fairness and competing interpretations. And for me, I understand the fairness question was that the app was too small. And then suddenly I start getting arguments on the negative side about the fact that if the app gets to do this, the negative says, well, this is a lot more work for me, that kind of thing. And I'm going, well, I'm pulling my hair out going, I don't know that I can necessarily resolve these issues. But where I ultimately come down AF on this is I have a 1AR response that says picks are bad. And I do not have an NR response to that. I have an extension that is pretty clear coming out into the 2AR, and I think to myself, well, okay, here's someplace where I can actually glom onto something and form a coherent explanation for how it informs my ballot. That being said, you know, congratulations, Kris. I think you needed to do just a little bit more work there. I don't think it would have taken much. I think you could have said simply that, no, picks are never bad. It tests the affirmative. It tests whether or not the affirmative is a good thing. But at the end of the day, I didn't have that.
Okay. I think it was kind of troubling that the 2 and R didn't respond to this picks arguments very directly, or at least very clearly. I have one place where you respond to it, where you say that the app could read different sorts of plans, like regional governments or something, and that would defend against picks. It doesn't seem like it would defend against a pick very well that's about a particular group of people. Certainly better than a whole res app, though. So at least that's playing some defense on the pick standard. And as I see it, I mean, this debate is going to be very, very close because you've largely conceded this argument that the neg will just make specific groups counter plans, which is worse or seemingly worse than the AF reading specific group plans. But the reason I end up voting neg is that I think I don't think that those things are exactly reciprocal, Cameron. So you treat it like, oh, well, it's either going to be groups on the AF or groups on the neg. But you haven't justified why banning handguns for a group of people is qualitatively the same as a pick that would allow handguns for a group of people, which are 2 different actions, right? So yes, they both apply to a group of people, but the contents of those things would be very different. So the 2 and R argument that I think gets there is a ground claim, that there just is no ground to debate against your AF. And this is very specific to your AF. And I don't have a single 2AR extension of what the neg is supposed to say against your AF. What disad is there, what case arguments are there, and you don't extend any of that defense in the 2AR. He says that the best neg argument or core neg arguments like politics are destroyed by your AF, so there's really nothing. The neg can read generics, but even the generics are terrible, so there is no neg ground. I don't have you responding to the ground argument in the 2 and R. Why this matters is that your attempt to go for the picks argument, you have to prove that there is also 0 ground against the picks that the neg will read. The picks are different because the pick isn't just reading your AF on the neg, because that would hardly be a pick if the AF said ban for everyone in the US and then the neg said ban for one tiny group of people. I mean, in theory, it's in the direction of the AF, but it's like so much smaller than the AF. It's not really what we mean when we say a pick, because it's not really plan inclusive if it is like a tiny subsection of the AF. So you would have to prove to me that there is an example of a pick that there's no grounds against that you lose. And I think all you say in the 2AR is survivors, like let survivors of IPP have guns. But you haven't said why there's no lit against that or why there's a debate. I mean, certainly it was an entire debate topic, so it's not intuitive to me that there's no ground against that counterclaim. And then you said the terror watch list. I don't understand how that would be a pick, like ban just for the terror watch list. I mean, that goes back to my earlier thing because I don't think that would be a pick. allow people on the terror watch list to have guns, that would be a terrible thing. So yeah, I think the neg does a better job showing me examples of what your AF is and other types of AFs that your AF would allow, such as mental health and the terror watch list AF, that there's no neg ground against, but you don't do the reciprocal thing and show pics or just like that. You do have a weighing argument about tailoring, but I think he does more specific work about how the politics DA doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well he tailors his offense, that the quality of the lit and the discussion surrounding your AF flows AF so heavily that tailoring argument doesn't really matter. There's some other defense. So the first thing I said, which was the region argument, and then I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think so I don't end up looking really to the limits standard for the neg. I think the ground argument is sufficient. You have to prove there's ground to debate your AF. If there isn't, you're not going to win your counter. Do you have any questions, or should we let Adam?
I'll go after.
Okay.
So my decision is similar to Bob's. I think the limit standard, how I see the pick argument applied in the 1A and extended in the 2A is not so much, like in the 1A I think it is understood more as like a non-unique kind of argument rather than a link term, which is how the 2A frames it. I think the other issue is that even in the 2A, at best it shows some kind of like, there's some kind of not reciprocity on limits, but there's equal offense on the limits debate, right? Because you are conceding the exponential number of AFs argument from the NR. So at best, you both have terrible limits for the debate. So I have to look for some kind of offense that lets me resolve that, or some way of resolving it. I don't think the weighing you do is sufficient at all when there's a conceded standard that shows there's a great amount of offense because you cannot read anything against this AF. That argument is dropped in the 2A, so I have a standard that I can pull the trigger.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I said I didn't really care about limits, but I actually, you reminded me there is that 2NR argument about groups of people is way less limiting than other types of plans like regions and stuff. So in the 2AR, you're just like, oh, your example of other plans I could read non-unique to your limits because there could be like lots of different regions or handguns that you ban. But he says specifically there are 300 million people, so the number of different permutations of people would make the debates, or the AFs unlimiting.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, I'm honestly too tired to ask questions.
Okay. All right.
Fair enough.